I've been in kind of an emulator craze the past few days, and on a search for weird bootleg games, I ended up coming across a game for the MSX called Superboy, which you may recognize from a Vinesauce stream hosted by Vinny, where he played this very game. And I remember back when I watched his video on it, I heard a very specific quote from him.
This is for the MSX. How the fuck am I gonna corrupt it?
At the time, I took this as a challenge, so I made attempts to corrupt the game. They were fairly successful, but I never ended up making a video on it. And I kind of lost my chance to use that footage because I lost it in a hard drive crash. So today I've decided to record a bunch of new footage. Now, immediately after recording, I had to go find the Superboy video so that I could use that quote, and I realized that Vinny already made a video on Superboy corruptions, like a few months after I recorded my original footage. But I recorded this footage for the second time, and I'm not about to waste it. And I gotta say, good on you, Vinny. I haven't watched the entirety of your video, but from the results that I got from corrupting this game, I can assume that you had a very fun time. And I hope that this video proves entertaining despite Vinny having already corrupted the game, because I ran into some crazy stuff of my own, not gonna lie. He may have had similar results, but I'm not sure. Again, I haven't watched the entirety of the video. So if you're not already aware, the game controls rather poorly on its own. Like, imagine if somebody just eyeballed Super Mario Bros. And then thought, yeah, I get the very, very bare-bones basic idea of what this is meant to be, and then tried to go for that bare-bones idea. Physics are not a real concept. Everything feels very janky. The world doesn't scroll at the same frame rate that the objects on screen do, which means that basically the terrain and stuff looks all choppy. Meanwhile, enemies and Superboy move really smoothly. Sorry, Zemina, but the bootleg Sega Genesis version was better. C for effort, though. I've seen worse. Now, my first order of business was to figure out how exactly I was going to corrupt this thing safely. The program I'm using, which is called Corrupt, has special modes to corrupt Genesis and NES games and PlayStation, Wii, stuff like that. And all these different modes have checks to make sure that you don't break something that's absolutely required for the game to run. The original Vinesauce ROM Corruptor was not designed for this, and that's why if you used it on a Genesis game, it would break. I'm using Genesis games as an example, of course. It's not just exclusive to Genesis games, but that's where the most prominent issues arise. Immediately, you might notice the fact that there is no special mode for MSX games. And that's fine. The MSX is obscure enough to where I think me and Vinny are the only people on the planet who were interested in corrupting games for it anyway. But this did pose a problem to me, because without a specialized MSX mode, I didn't know what addresses in the code were safe to modify. So it was a little bit of trial and error. I got a few issues where the game just straight up wouldn't run, or it would crash as soon as you went past the title screen. But because of the nature of both the Corruptor and the emulator, I was able to easily circumvent these, using known configurations that worked fine, and then going from there. Initially, I was kind of conservative about how many bytes I wanted to modify, and this proved quite useful in the long run. Once I wrapped my dumb head around the Corruptor, I tried my very first corruption, and there was no audio at all. That was the very first corruption that I made. This video is not muted at all. This is how it was. So it was good to know that I had modified the ROM. I was making progress. My second corruption had minimal changes, but immediately I noticed a few visual glitches. And the audio was back, so that's a plus, I guess. You'll notice as I break this brick, it breaks in half. Not sure if that was a glitch in the game or a corruption. I'm going to assume corruption because it didn't happen at all when I was playing through this uncorrupted. The next time I corrupted, we made a little bit more progress. The title screen got one less visual glitch, but the basic idea is still there. Unfortunately, my excitement was very short-lived, as the game crashed on us as soon as I tried to advance past the title card. Immediately I figured this was because the start address was so close to the beginning of the ROM, so I decided to change that. And this next corruption is something else. Superboy's sprite is a little bit screwed up. He's got kind of a sliver coming out of his arm, but that's definitely not the worst of our problems. I decided to go a bit forward and jump. Audio warning, you might want to turn it down. We had a very bizarre and very interesting audio glitch. You might also notice a floating 9 here. Basically, every time I would jump, it would play a very long, low beep for a while. I think it would go on forever if I allowed it to. It was also playing a bunch of other random sound effects in place of others. Like the game was attempting to read more data than it should have. Except games like these didn't really distinguish between sound and audio data, so it's probably reading some sprite data as well. Which might be why we're hearing sound effects that aren't actually in the game. My next corruption restarted the system as soon as I tried to go past the title card, but at least we get some cool visual glitches. God damn it. This next corruption was interesting. At first I thought it was only visual, because you can see a little bit of screwed up sprites. And then as I was playing more, I started to notice that there was more wrong than just the visuals. Did somebody kill whoever was performing the music? Like, for real, that's what it sounds like. The next corruption had mostly visual glitches, but this time it's not just screwed up sprites. There were some misplaced tiles as well. But what I found most interesting was what was happening to the music. Somebody shot the band players again or something. That'll show them for playing the underworld theme in the overworld. This randomly placed question mark block prevented me from getting to the top of the flagpole. So that's a little crappy. Okay, I know I was joking about shooting the band players and all, but this actually sounds like there's gunshots that just halt the playing. Did you hear that? Jesus Christ, that's morbid. I think these red things over here were meant to be bridges, but they kind of look like the tops of thumbtacks. I was able to collide with them, which is what led me to believe that they were bridges of some sort. As I enter the pipe to get to the surface, I realize there is yet another question mark block that would prevent me from getting to the top. I was trying to jump over the question mark block, but I was not able to because there was another invisible block right next to it. While World 1-3 is the farthest I've gotten so far, I was losing motivation to play this specific corruption. There was not much to offer past 1-2. So back to the Corruptor I go. We have a visual glitch or two. We broke the audio again somehow. Aside from that, I didn't notice anything special, so I'm just gonna skip this one. This next one was actually the most I've seen a level modified by corruption. You can immediately notice there's two block pieces that I can walk on. I guess if you didn't want to jump onto the platform with the question mark blocks on your own, that could be a crutch. Nothing else seemed to be changed, so I decided to move on to another corruption. It carried over the level changes, but brought in a bunch of other shit too. The music was like it was attempting to survive, but then just gave up. The pipes have a black streak running down them, and the hill pallets are extremely screwed up. I was bored, so I tried another corruption. You can notice visual glitches, but that's not what I found interesting. As soon as we start up the game, the music plays, but nothing else does. Oh yeah, and when I got hit by the Goomba, it restarted the game. I got fed up as Superboy eventually. I was getting funny stuff, but nothing genuinely interesting past my initial attempts. So I packed the bags on the MSX, and I decided to move on to a different port of a different game. It just wouldn't be a Landy video if you didn't mention Sonic at least once, so this time I tried to corrupt the very notorious NES port of Sonic the Hedgehog, obviously bootleg. Now I'm using a modified version by somebody named Jabu, as well as some custom music by a dude named T.I., and this is just so that I can save myself the hassle of playing something that's incredibly broken to begin with. I already had enough of Superboy's terrible controls, so I'd rather deal with something slightly less terrible if I'm going to make it even more terrible anyway. The modifications make it very palatable and playable. It doesn't improve everything, but it makes it a much better experience and definitely optimal for corruption. The title screens didn't change, so I had no idea what I was getting into. And then it was very clear to me. The video compression is probably completely destroying this right now, but it looks like a damn rave party. It's awful. In fact, it's giving me a headache just looking at it, so I'm gonna move on to the next corruption, which wasn't that different. So this one looked less like a rave party and more like a really screwed up jungle. The enemies' projectiles are already difficult to avoid even before corrupting this game, but this made it even worse as not only could I not see the enemies themselves, but their projectiles were basically just lost in the mess of pixels. Visually, this next corruption was a lot closer to the first one than the second, but there was one very interesting tidbit I noticed, and that was the stage itself was actually being modified. You can see that I'm about to fall through this little pit here and die. I think I'm falling through a floor of some sort. I fell through it 2 other times because I completely forgot to just avoid it altogether. And it was around that time that I decided that I was just going to give up corrupting this game. There wasn't enough changes to really give me the motivation to pursue this. When you get a game over, Sonic's life icon has this specific expression on it, and I could not agree more, Sonic. So in the end, we got semi-funny and somewhat interesting stuff. More than likely nothing that was new if you've already watched the Vinny corruption video of Superboy. But I had fun, and I feel like that's what matters the most. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you next time. Maybe I'll corrupt more games, maybe I'll screw around with old games. I know I downloaded a few old, ancient versions of emulators, and some of the earliest emulators ever made, so that should be fun to screw around with. Let me know if you want more of this sort of thing, and I'll see you next time.